Welcome to Generation Index, and in this next few sessions we're just going to talk about how to create a healthy multi-generational work environment. My name is Adrian Adams and I'm the founding director of Generation Index, and with me I have two friends that's going to join me in this conversation. On my left is Justine Smalley, and she's going to give some perspective just from her personal experience from the work environment, and then also I have Tarsus Nieuwoud that's going to share from his perspective as well. So to start this first session, we just want to create a bit of context as to where we are currently, what are we experiencing around the world, and how do we prepare ourselves best for this next decade that's ahead of us. There's a lot of talks about the fourth industrial revolution, what it's going to look like, what might we as individuals and as companies and corporates experience during this next few years. And one of the things that I personally feel strong about, and I know how you guys feel about it, is this whole disruptive change that we find ourselves in. There's so much happening, so much going on. It's almost like we're in a space of information overload, and somewhere in between we try to get direction. So I don't know, any of you want to give some input or feedback as to your experience in the workspace? Maybe Justine, from your side, is do you experience that it's a disruptive place? Or do you experience as, we've got all sorted out, we know where we're heading to, that kind of a thing?
Well, yeah, so I come from an HR background, and I do find that most organizations are competitive in nature. So, we're either tracing or striving to be the best at the product that we deliver, or we're just chasing that bottom line. And we're always competitive, bringing in the disruptive nature of the fourth industrial revolution with artificial intelligence, with robotics, with all this technology that's being added. We need to be even more competitive. And we have to be mindful and conscious of what that is, the effect that it's having on our employees, on us as leaders in the organization, and on society and the whole community as a whole.
Yeah, and what are some of the things that you maybe, Tarsus, in your space experience that are causing disruptions that people are struggling to deal with?
The complexity, every element that's added to the workplace and you have to deal with almost demands a higher emotional intelligence, and a lot of people are just tired. They don't know how to deal with this. And so for me, it's trying to simplify that complexity to be more effective, to be more humane in the workplace, not letting the artificial intelligence and everything that's out there, the competitiveness, take away. I just read an article by someone, a book called Death by Paycheck, that says stress-related work caused, just in China, 1 million people a year that dies. That should be a big wake-up call for us, and that in itself is very disruptive. Families, social environments, communities, context, it's all interrelated these days. We don't live in these silos anymore. So the question is, how do we simplify and engage with this disruption, which in itself creates energy, and maybe we should just flow and see how we can work with that.
I'm glad that you mentioned emotional intelligence, because for a long time we, as companies, we focus on intellectual creation and the value of making sure that you've come through the right universities, had the right background, etc. And then from that point of, we started to move into the emotional intelligence. How do we adapt, or not really just adapt, but how do we understand our environment? How do we understand one another? But there's also the third element of adaptable creation. Now, how adaptable are we as people? Because what we understood from how things used to be done now, it can be done differently in the future. And companies struggle to be adaptive. They kind of understand, well, we have all the right people in place. They've got the right backgrounds, right universities, right studies that they've gone through. And obviously we focus on the emotional equation with that, but also the adaptability of people, the importance on that.
I think it's understanding. That's why education is so important now. Worldwide, it's a global phenomenon. There's MOOCs and educational centers and online courses just exploding all over the place, and the reason for that is because if we understand multi-generational patterns, we understand monetary systems, we understand how people can use their emotional intelligence, gender equality, and I can go on and on. then we start to define and work out models, new models that's not archaic, that's more relevant to now and the world we live in. I think our systems are absolutely obsolete, and we have to rethink and redesign and almost rebrand and reimagine the new workspace.
So what we're basically saying is that we need to look at this entire world that we experience currently from a different perspective. We obviously, as humans, we tend to look at it from a two-dimensional view, as into this is who I am, this is what I am doing, and out there is the rest of the world, and they're doing it that way, and I've got a personal view as into who they are, and almost like an opinion as into what they do, and often we focus on the differences. But when we look at this environment and the space we're going into at this moment is what I often refer to as creating a fourth dimensional view. So it is not just about, and Einstein actually explains it very well in his theory on relativity. He says, if this is point A and this is point B, if I look at whatever's in between here from point A's perspective, it's like I'm the one that's standing still and B is the one that's moving up and down. But when you speak to point B, he would say, no, I'm standing still, but A is the one that is moving up and down. And that's a typical two-dimensional view, as into this is who I am, that's the rest of the world, they are wrong, they need to change. But the moment you take on a third-dimensional view, you realize it's not just A that's standing still and B moving, or B standing still and A moving, but both are moving actually up and down. And so we start to realize that even in the context of generations, it is not just this is my generation, this is who you are, and you are creating all this disruption and this chaos that we experience in the workspace, but we are collectively adding value and often creating the chaos. But on a fourth dimensional view is I will look at it and realize all of this, but I will also notice that it's going somewhere. So we have all these elements that are taking place around in the workspace, all these different things that are adding towards this globalization, urbanization. I mean, in Southern Africa, we are the fastest urbanizing region in the world. How is that impacting? So we have all these different factors, but where are we heading towards? And what is, and this is maybe the question that I want to leave, is that what is it we then need to do as a business, as an individual, that are passionate about going forward and seeing my company grow? How do I view all of these things and say create direction in that context?
What I really like about what you said a bit earlier about the adaptability coefficient is resilience, that adaptability to a world of change. And I think a lot of companies struggle with building a culture where generations come together, cultures come together, genders come together, and we're all trying to achieve a bigger goal, which is that fourth dimension that you want to bring in. But ultimately, people need to be resilient. People need to have that focus of not only their own careers, but where the company's going. And that's what excites me so much about what you're doing in the generational work, is that different generations focus on different things. But at the end of the day, change is coming, the world is changing, and we need to be adaptable. We need to adjust and be resilient. So, I mean, just something that comes to mind is companies bring in different activities or workplace environments that make the culture resilient, like bottomless coffee and gyms or yoga sessions or whatever would make you more resilient so that you don't die of stress at the end of the year in China, But we need to focus that on not just resilience as a topic, but really look at what it means for different generations per se, and the different cultural groups, and what it means for different genders, and how those come together to ultimately achieve the bigger goal at the end of the day.
So what he's saying is not just about the behavioral patterns, it's about the values that we need to put in place.
And the authenticity of that, because we can just put that wet paint around and say, guys, we've got bottomless coffee and we all think we have a great work environment, but people are working ungodly hours and they don't have work-life balance. So where's the authenticity in really giving people that resilience?
So it's almost, if you apply a third dimensional view, you will say, well, to really get A and B to understand one another is we create this blue room or the coffee shop kind of a thing, but it's that fourth dimensional view in saying, well, you can create all of that, but is he still going to achieve the goals that we set out for ourselves. And I like the word that you say, authenticity. And I think that's something that really lacks in the workspace.
For me, it's shared values. That's the bridge. That's the key in the adaptability quotient. A few years ago, I spent some time in the Silicon Valley area, Bay Area, and trying to learn from people like Google and Intel and all these companies that's situated there. And you're trying to figure out what's the culture. Everyone wants to Google culture. But I think something observing, that's a nice thing when you just sit there like a fly on a wall and just observe. I was reading a newspaper at a local Starbucks then, and I saw these culture clashes because the values are different. The generations and the focuses and the goals are different. So you've got this big startup companies, massive, making lots of money, and everyone wants to work there. Everyone in the world is heading towards Silicon Valley. But then you've got the local community. So what happened was a lot of these tech giants, they pay their employees a lot of money. So they buy houses so that the house prices go up. And then the local people that grew up there can't afford to stay in the place where they grew up. So at some stage, Google had to take the branding of the buses which they help the employees to get to work from San Francisco and Sunnyvale and all the surrounding areas. Because the local community were throwing the Google buses with rocks. So you've got the local culture community being very upset with this Google culture. And everyone's like, hey, we need to be like Google. But we have to ask, how does these cultures clash and how can we create shared values with common goals that is, I think, more cohesive, more of a symbiotic relationship. And that's the key. Because when I leave work, I go live where? And that's just as important as my work as well.
And it's not as if you can split the two kind of, I've got a work environment and I've got a home environment.
Yeah, I'm more into work-life integration and not work-life balance. Work-life balance doesn't work anymore. We cannot put it in silos. We have to see how can we integrate and get that harmony and symbiotic relationship.
And I know we might talk about it a little bit later, but just you specifically in one conversation that we had previously mentioned about we so focus on the work-life balance, but it's as if we've more moved into a life-work balance. And we'll get to that into some of the other sessions. But I think to just summarize, if we look at where we are in the world today, whether as an individual, as a leader, as a company, as an organization, we realize that what's ahead of us is there's going to be a lot of disruption taking place.
To summarize, it's a problem, but it's also opportunity. We can shape.
And that's that fourth dimensional view. It's like we take note of what is happening at the moment and we notice he's heading in that direction. We're not necessarily happy as into where it is heading towards, but we now have an opportunity to, what we often refer to as, create pockets of influence in saying, how do we help to shape where we're going? And I think this is what this entire course is all about. It's about creating this intergenerational space. There's a lot of talks about generations and the differences, etc. And it's valuable to understand that there are differences, but it's also to identify the similarities. And our goal through this entire course is, how do we help to understand generations in their different elements a little bit better, how these generations are formed, but then identify the similarities throughout this and say, how do we work together for the greater good as a company, as an individual, as a community, and as a person.